welcome. I'm glad you joined us today for Entrusted with the Gospel. I am Dr. Michael Reynolds, and I am the Executive Director and the Associate Dean at Trinity International University at our South Chicago Regional Center. The address is 14240 on Dante Avenue in Dalton, Illinois. And today we have a very important subject matter to take a look at. The topic is African roots of the African American Christianity. And we brought on the show for us today an expert in this subject matter. The person that we have for today is Dr. David Daniels. He has a BS from Bowdoin College, he has an MDiv from Yale University, and he has a PhD from Union Theological Seminary located in New York. He is a full professor at McCormick Theological Seminary in the area of church history and brings to us a wealth of information and knowledge about this important subject. I'd like to welcome you on the show today, Dr. Daniels.
Thank you so much for welcoming me to Entrusted with the Gospel.
There's a lot of thoughts about what has happened over time for African Americans and where they get their Christianity from. There's a lot of discussion about the fact that this Christianity that we've been delivered was somewhat biased and was somewhat imprisoning to our minds. But today we're going to look at some realities that will probably bring a different view to the table out of your personal area of expertise. Can you talk to us a little bit about what role African Christians played in introducing and advancing Christianity in North America?
It is amazing that if you listen to people on the street or critics of Christianity, they often lifted up the fact that Christianity is a white man's religion. They give you the impression that Christianity was born in Europe. And they lead one to believe that African people did not know Christianity until they met white slave holders, what some people call slave masters, and white missionaries in the United States. That's not true. There's another trajectory to that history, and that is the role of people of African descent. What some people don't realize, that as early as the 1490s, before Christopher Columbus arrives in what becomes the Americas, there were churches within Africa. Long history of churches within Ethiopia. But in this period of the 1400s, churches emerged, especially within the Congo and Angola and other places like Benin and Warri, as well as other parts of the West African coast. What that means is that among the enslaved Africans that come to what becomes the United States are people who are already Christian. And by the time you get to the 1600s, when people are coming to Jamestown, Virginia, or coming to New York City, you already had Christianity within Angola and Congo for over 120 and 30 years.
Well, Dr. Daniels, that creates a real problem for a lot of people who have made the assault on Christianity to a lot of African Americans, that Christianity really has been something that was delivered to them from white people and therefore should be rejected, and an invitation to people to be involved in other religious belief systems. You mean to tell me today that Christianity already pre-existed and that some of the sharing of the gospel actually came from people who were pre-Christians or were Christians before they ever arrived in the United States?
That is true, which means that Christianity is already in Africa before you had the transatlantic slave trade. Before enslaved people were brought over from Africa to the Americas, there was already Christianity in Africa along the coast. These people then, who had been Christian for 130, 140 years, they then arrive in North America already knowing Jesus Christ, already reading the Bible, already praying, already knowing the Lord's Prayer. Some of them could even read the Bible because literacy was already within the Congo in the 1500s. They had supposedly over 1,000 students within schools in some of the provinces throughout the Congo. And these literate Africans then are the ones that began to tell other Africans from the Mandingo or the Ewe or the Akan or Ashan, they begin to tell them the good news of Jesus Christ on these plantations. And one of the reasons why they're key, why these Africans are key, is because within the 1600s, a number of whites believed that there was a connection between political liberty and spiritual liberty. They felt if you were a Christian, we couldn't enslave you. So therefore, they didn't want to introduce Christianity to Africans because they didn't want to have them be manumitted or freed. So they had to try to work that through. The other part is that you had some places where, especially in Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, some of the white people weren't really Christians anyway. They didn't go to church. They might have been Christians in name, but they didn't go to worship. They didn't participate in the life of the church. They didn't live a Christian life. Consequently, then, they had no interest in evangelizing Africans when they weren't even Christians themselves for the most part. These Christians, then, these Angolans, these Congolese, maybe occasionally someone from Benin and Wari, they then serve as a witness to Jesus Christ among these enslaved Africans. So when you found a few priests, Episcopal priests in this case, who wanted to talk about Christianity, they discovered that these Angolans and Congolese already knew Christianity. Wow. And that's what's amazing.
Well, let me go back to one of the points that you were sharing just a few minutes ago. A book like Philemon, for example, that actually advises and tells people that they should consider somebody their brother once they have accepted Christ. That would have been a very powerful message to people to release slaves. So you're saying that they weren't going to give that message and thereby give the equality of salvation. I want you to think about that just a moment while we break for a moment, and once we do, we'll come back. And I'd like for you to share with us for a moment the power of what that meant to make sure that people didn't feel politically free and therefore resisted the sharing of the gospel. But the important part of that is that many people already knew it anyway, right?
That's right. You got the message.
Let's take a moment to take this break to our sponsors, and we'll be back in just a moment.
New Life Celebration Christian Academy, the right choice for developing tomorrow's leaders. New Life is registering students from 3 to 14 years of age now for their fall academic program. Full and part-time rates are available. DCFS and DHS Action for Children vouchers are accepted. Family rates available also. Enroll now by calling 708-849-2787. Our program offers high standards for curriculum, character development, Christian discipleship, physical education, student computer lab, Spanish, arts and crafts, and more. New Life Celebration Christian Academy, conveniently located at 14243 South Dante in Dalton, Illinois. Register now, 708-849-2787. 708-849-2787. New Life Celebration Christian Academy. We're growing leaders here.
Trinity has had a dedication to the Chicago students for the last 30 years or so.
All kinds of arenas of life are engaged in this kind of setting.
We take the centrality of the gospel and ask, how does it speak into urban realities?
We have younger students as well as people who are already professionals, and they come here to enhance their Christian education or their theological education.
Welcome back to Entrusted with the Gospel. I hope that you listened to our sponsors and heard things that would be helpful to you. I'm here today with Dr. David Daniels, and we're talking about, in particular, what kind of roots were in Africa that extended over into North America. I've asked him to reiterate this particular point because I think it's of great importance, and that is the power of a book like Philemon that would have set Africans free politically was somewhat limited because there was a fear of their white holders. Could you comment on that just a little bit, Dr. Daniels?
Yes. One of the things we need to realize that until about 1670s, people of African descent within North America were basically indentured servants. What it means is that you serve a person for 7 years and then you're set free. After the 1870s, then they began to extend it to lifetime, perpetual slavery as it's called. And what was worse, even your children were enslaved. A child of an enslaved person was also to be enslaved. So this tension then, if you could have that gave them spiritual liberty, being free in Christ, meant they had political liberty, meaning they had rights in society, and they could not be enslaved, then made slaveholders have less interest in evangelizing people of African descent. So they made all kinds of rules that said that you need to separate the two. But even when those two were separated, there still wasn't a large interest in evangelizing people of African descent. So therefore, one finds then the first mass conversion of people of African descent occurring in what's called Low Country, South Carolina. That's that part down near the Atlantic where Charleston and Goose Creek, St. Stephen's, and other parts of South Carolina is today. One finds as early as the 1710s, people like an Episcopal priest by the name of Reverend Francis Lejeune, who says that there among the enslaved people here are people who are from Angola. Some people think they're really Congolese. He says they speak English, they understand Christianity, that they practice Roman Catholicism, and that a group of them can read. And he says they have asked him, can they have communion?
Wow.
They're coming to him first. He's not going to them. They're asking him, can they have communion? Because they had communion back at home. So therefore then, one can see that there's already an interest emerging within the African American community among the small group of people who are already converted. All the way up to the 1740s, you see this group continuing to grow in numbers. Almost 8,000 people from Angola and Congo come to Low Country, South Carolina. And you continue to have priests and others note that they're Christians. Matter of fact, if I could read a quote for you, there's one quote from a letter from 1739 that says, amongst the Negro slaves, there are people brought from the kingdom of Angola in Africa. Many of these speak Portuguese, by reason that the Portuguese have considerable settlement. And the Jesuits have a mission and school in the kingdom, and many thousands of the Negroes there profess the Roman Catholic religion.
Wow.
What that tells us is that even the white people knew that there were schools and missions in Africa where Africans were learning to read, to write, and they practiced Christianity. And these people, I believe, are the ones that serve as the evangelists and the missionaries on the plantations that are able to tell Africans the gospel. And then in this Low Country, South Carolina, in the 1740s, there's this mass revival. Again, as I said earlier, the first mass revival among people of African descent in North America occurs in this area. And to me, it makes sense why. These Angolan and Congolese Christians were the ones that planted the seeds of the gospel, and a revival breaks out in the 1840s, and a large number of Africans convert to Christianity. And what one will find is that among the first churches that African Americans start, they're in this area. They're in Savannah, Georgia. They're in Silver Creek, South Carolina. And out of that area, Baptist churches emerge and others emerge because of the fact, I believe, these Angolan and Congolese Christians who by the 1740s had already been Christians for over 250 years. And they were literate Christians that they could communicate the gospel among those in which they lived.
So the question becomes, the question that's on the table right now is that the movement of the gospel, the evangelism of the gospel, the missionary movement of the gospel may not have at all come from residents of North America, but you're alluding to the fact, and even being very upfront, that it really came from Africans that were already converted for centuries. Their family had been following Christ, and they become the very first people that really start a movement among Africans to become Christians, so that North American, African American Christianity comes out of the African converting in North America other Africans. Is that right?
That's what I'm saying.
Wow.
As a matter of fact, a comparison. In Jamaica, there are very few people of African descent who were Christians throughout most of the 1700s. Do you know when Christianity really begins to grow among the Africans within Jamaica?
Tell me.
It's after the American Revolution.
Wow.
When a group of African Christians in North America, we might call them African Americans now, George Liele and others, go to Jamaica.
Wow.
They go there with the white loyalists who don't want to be in this independent United States. They want to be in another British colony. So a group goes to Nova Scotia, another group goes to Bahama, and then a group goes to Jamaica. And when this group goes to Jamaica, they're the first group to actively evangelize among the people of African descent, besides some Moravians who had been there a couple of decades before.
Well, let me ask a question here that may be ringing in the head of our audience as they're listening to this. Many will cite that there's differences between the style of worship. I'm not talking about the content of the word, but the style of worship in African Americans and the style of worship that goes on from European Americans. Many would tie the European awakening and all those kinds of movements to the way the Europeans worship in the United States. Are you also saying that our style of worship, since it was not adopted from them, may have its uniqueness because it dates back to periods that go back into Africa? Would you go as far as to say our roots may actually go to the continent of Africa?
I wouldn't want to be definitive, only because we're looking with sketchy material. Unfortunately, what I'm talking about is material we know from whites who talk to Africans or what becomes African Americans and write that history down. But one of the things that is curious is that observers show that within the Congo, for instance, as early as the 1400s, during the 1500s, they used drums, other percussive instruments. They use a string instrument that's like a guitar or violin or banjo. They created their own music that had their own rhythmic style. And then they had what we would now call a ring shout. It's a circular dance in which a person in the center of the circle does a call, and the people around the circle, they do a response, and they dance, and they end up going faster and faster and faster around the circle. It has been shown that the Congolese had a dance like that among the church within the Congo, as well as within the traditional religion. But they've also seen people practice a dance like that in Brazil, in the Caribbean, in New York, in South Carolina. And so you have this ritual, as it was, going from South America all the way to North America.
So there is continuity, though you may not go as far as to say a lot of direct continuity, but there's continuity between the worship that originates in Africa and in the United States.
What I would say is that there's a font out of which this worship emerges. Okay. There's a source, a framework. Because I'm not saying that you can look at this practice here and then see this practice in a Baptist church in 1910 or 2010. What I'm saying is that you can see a trajectory we could call a worship or liturgical trajectory emerging.
Thank you. I appreciate this look into the roots of Africa and looking and asking questions about Christianity in the United States. We're going to break again to go to our sponsors, and we come back, we're going to continue this discussion, and we're going to talk in particular about the impact that it has had in the United States as we're talking now, and about some of its long-term effects. Again, please come back with us after you listen to our sponsors.
New Life Celebration Christian Academy, the right choice for developing tomorrow's leaders. New Life is registering students from 3 to 14 years of age now for their fall academic program. Full and part-time rates are available. DCFS and DHS Action for Children vouchers are accepted. Family rates available also. Enroll now by calling 708-849-2787. Our program offers high standards for curriculum, character development, Christian discipleship, physical education, student computer lab, Spanish, arts and crafts, and more. New Life Celebration Christian Academy, conveniently located at 14243 South Dante in Dalton, Illinois. Register now, 708-849-2787. 708-849-2787. New Life Celebration Christian Academy. We're growing leaders here.
Trinity has had a dedication to the Chicago students for the last 30 years or so.
All kinds of arenas of life are engaged in this kind of setting.
We take the centrality of the gospel and ask, how does it speak into urban realities?
We have younger students as well as people who are already professionals, and they come here to enhance their Christian education or their theological education.
Welcome back to Entrusted with the Gospel. I'm Dr. Michael Reynolds. I'm here with Dr. David Daniels, an expert in the area of church history and specifically looking at issues that have to do with African Christianity and how it impacts African American Christianity. We have been talking so far about what has gone on, that Africans were the first to serve as evangelists and missionaries in the United States. That, to me, is an incredible amount of information that needs to be known around the globe. Also, we were just having a discussion about where are the hot spots in Africa prior to the transatlantic trade, and where are the hot spots in the United States where these revival points break out. I want Dr. Daniels to take just a moment to recap for you the hot places where Christianity is growing prior to the transatlantic trade and the hot spots that are occurring in the United States just after the transatlantic trade. Dr. Daniels.
Yes. Well, in Africa, if you take the transatlantic slave trade beginning in the 1500s, that you already have then Christianity in the Congo, which is emerging and really has some strength by 1516. There's some presence of Christianity within Angola. A little later, sort of simultaneous with the rise of the transatlantic slave trade, there'll be Christianity in Wari and in Benin, as well as recall that Christianity had already been in Ethiopia at least as early as the 4th century. So by the time you get to the transatlantic slave trade, Christianity had already been in Ethiopia almost 1,000 years. So when one realizes that, one can see then that the people who are participants in introducing Christianity in the Americas are not only the Europeans, but also the Africans.
And then as we come over into the United States, where are these hot spots that the revivals, and we have evidence of Africans sharing their faith in the United States? Where's that at?
It's interesting because a place like New York, among the first Africans to come there, as well as a place like Jamestown, Virginia, are people from Angola. If you look at their names, and there's a list of their names, they often have a last name of Angola or de Angola. And so you know that they're saying that who I am from Angola. And so you have these lists. And so that was one place. That's not a revival, but its presence as early as 1620s, 1630s. Where one sees the revivals, though, again, are in low country South Carolina. And that's where the first, again, mass conversion of people of African descent. But one can also see other people who are Christians within this Virginia, Maryland area, what's called the Chesapeake area. And then within the Spanish colonies, one has a group of Africans who are Christians within Florida.
Now, there's a trajectory that continues to occur in Africa, and Christianity doesn't die out. Instead, there are whole kingdoms that are committed to Christianity. Can you talk a little bit about how that trajectory, even after the transatlantic slave trade, how Africa continued to be a place where Christianity was still growing?
Yes. Christianity in the places that I'm describing at least remains vital and active up until the 1700s. Some places, 1740s, a couple places, 1770s. But they get undermined by the slave trade. In order to get the numbers of slaves, in a way, Africans are incited to fight each other, to be in war so you can capture. So there's the disabling of African society, the church in Africa. All of it is undermined by the sort of political intrigue of the Europeans as they're seeking to destabilize Africa in order to get more slaves. The only place where there is this long period is Ethiopia. There's places in South Africa, but part of that is mixed because Europeans begin to go to South Africa in the 1600s. But you see African communities also continuing in that area. Unfortunately, in the Congo, they get interrupted. Okay. So in the Congo, the church basically collapses in the 1700s. And while there are people who are practicing Christianity, they don't have church buildings anymore. They're not priests anymore. They're not schools anymore. But what's surprising is that people like David Livingstone, the great explorer,
yes,
when he goes to Congo,
yes,
he still finds some Christians there.
Wow.
And matter of fact, in Angola, he even finds what he calls some dark-skinned priests.
Man.
People who know Portuguese, they know Latin, and they're educated. And he runs into this one prince who wants to be educated in Portugal, just like his ancestors had.
Wow.
So this vision is still there, but unfortunately, the church doesn't have the vitality that it had. And so in a way, there's outside of Ethiopia, within sub-Saharan Africa, there's clearly parts of the church within Egypt among the Arabs and Copts. But within sub-Saharan Africa, you have places that are isolated for the most part. And then you have the introduction of European missionaries coming in, opening up missions in a more consistent way, especially Protestants, after the 1790s, and then moving into the 19th century. But what I must note, though, is that many people think there's a link between European colonization, creating colonies, and Christianity. And in many of these places, the missionaries come first. The colonies come later.
So the colonization does not spread Christianity, but instead Christianity is already present because the missionaries have already arrived.
Yes, that tends to be the case in most parts of Africa. There's some isolated places where there's not, and South Africa will be one of them where that's not.
This show raises so many questions, Dr. Daniel, and I hate to say that this is a time that we really have to look at what does it mean for us to continue to do further study here.
Yes.
Of course, somebody could come to Trinity International University, which is located at 14240 on Dante Avenue. That's the South Chicago Regional Center. And you could have Dr. Daniels as one of your professors so that you can get questions answered. He raised the question about slave trade and the involvement of Africans actually capturing and selling their own people. Well, there's a deeper story to that, and he'd be willing to open up and tell you more about what that means. Again, we're very glad that you joined us at Entrusted with the Gospel, and this has been a powerful show. Please tell others to come and watch us and see what God will share with you about the direction that God would have in your life. Thank you for joining us today.